Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Curious K podcast. My name is Kolakbo, and I'm your host. This is a very exciting episode, and this is a follow up or part of the AI series that we started some weeks ago. The first as part of the series was a conversation with Billy, which was a very exciting conversation where we spoke about the strategies we can use to identify problems that we can solve with AI. And today, we are going to have a very exciting conversation, and I'm very thrilled to introduce Fiona Melzer. She's an exceptional data and AI analyst who possesses a deep passion for responsible AI. And Fiona's academic journey is remarkable, culminating in a master's degree in cognitive science from the University of Edinburgh. And Fiona has worked at an AI ethics consultancy firm where she worked with academic experts to translate cutting edge AI ethics research into practical workshops for SMEs and startups. And with a mission to ensure responsible AI deployment, Fiona is dedicated to harnessing the advantages of AI while considering the complex interplay between society, humans, and code. And today we'll be exploring AI ethics, which is essentially ensuring responsible development and deployment of AI. And we are very excited to have Fiona join us on this podcast today. Thank you, Fiona, for joining us, and welcome to Curious K Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to have this conversation with you today.
Absolutely. And how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. So I'm in London at the moment, and usually the weather is quite grey, but as we're going towards the end of May, we've got sunshine now, so it's a great day to have a conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very sunny day in Lagos. I'm in Lagos right now. I mean, I stepped out some minutes and I walked back in sweating. It's really hot here, but it's good.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful weather. It's clear, and I mean, we are looking forward to an exciting conversation here today. All right. So without much ado, Fiona, let's just get into it. Can you share with us your journey into this fascinating world of AI? How did your background shape your path, and what can you say sparked your interest in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied cognitive science at the University of Edinburgh, as you mentioned, and I think cognitive science AI ethics is a very interdisciplinary field. So I didn't just take courses from one sort of degree program, but rather I worked in linguistics, psychology, informatics, and philosophy. So you kind of learn to look at problems from many different points of view. And at university, we had something called the Beneficial AI Society, which was a group of us really just getting together, talking about different AI and technology applications and the sort of impact it has on society. And, sometimes the benefits and sometimes the detriments, and sort of having um, researchers and professors presenting their research and then discussing about it, which I think was the sort of initial spark for me to get into that field or to learn about, we're not just talking about technology, but there's actually a sort of human perspective, not just the code perspective to look at it. Um, and then from there, I was working, as you mentioned, with an AI ethics consultancy where we work with companies and clients to look at their AI strategy and their technology or algorithmic product to see, what sort of unintended side consequences could this have that you didn't think of before, and how can we make sure this is safe for everyone to use. But then on the other hand, we were also harnessing that sort of academic connection that we all had by bringing in the researchers that are doing research and bias and these sort of things to really bring that into companies. I still believe there's a sort of disconnect between the academic research that's being done on these topics, and then what actually ends up being deployed and being done in the sort of companies that work with these technologies. So that's kind of how I got into it. And then from there, I wrote my thesis and testing bias mitigation algorithms using the sort of infamous Compass case study by now. And currently I work in a big four consulting company in an intelligent automation team.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a very interesting background. AI has always been around for years, but the recent innovation in terms of the language models, the chat GTP just uh, brings about like a new awakening for people. But the reality is that this technology has been around for a long time. So as we know that AI comes in different forms, from narrow to general intelligence, can you help us understand the distinction between these two and shed light on what it takes to achieve true artificial general intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, it has been around for years. The earliest forms of AI is what in the field they call the good old-fashioned AI, which often was just you were encoding handwritten rules and just automating them in order to make decisions. So it was very much still human controlled. What nowadays we look at as AI are really algorithms learn patterns from data and essentially manage to reproduce them. But that doesn't mean that they understand what they're learning. It's very akin to sort of a child that just listens to language a lot, eventually being able to speak the language. But that doesn't mean that the child knows the grammar consciously of that language, which is why we have grammar education in school, because native speakers often don't really know the underlying theory of the languages they speak, and in the same way algorithms just they've learned the pattern and then they're able to reproduce the pattern without necessarily understanding the meaning of the pattern. And I think usually sort of in AI you have something that's good at one task, so you train an algorithm on a very narrow data set, for example, to distinguish cats from dogs in pictures, or to analyze your specific buying behavior and suggest the one new exciting thing that you really should buy from Amazon. That's kind of what we've been used to so far, which now of course has changed somewhat excitingly, but also somewhat scarily with the large language models and chat GPT. So that, I think the goal with those is to achieve something that's called like general intelligence, right? Or artificial general intelligence, which is usually measured by human standards, like when a system is able to do all of the sort of intelligent tasks that a human can do. But it's very ill-defined what when do we reach general intelligence, because from a cognitive science perspective, even as a human, our intelligence isn't just within our brain. It includes the social patterns, our bodies, how we interact with it, and so it's a bit ill-defined whether or not AI needs that. um, I think now with sort of chat GPT, the idea is that it's a general intelligence in the sense that you can ask it a question about anything, and it's likely to give you an answer, right? But that really just is because we fed it a much larger training database. So rather than just giving it a very narrow database that's optimized for one task, we just fed it with pretty much anything and everything the internet had to offer. Yeah, but I think the one step that people are still sort of looking for is this sort of um, well, artificial consciousness, right? When the robot takes over by itself and just runs away and I don't know, becomes a transformer or something along those lines. And that we definitely haven't reached, and maybe we will never. Who knows?
Yeah, and that's really interesting, Fiona, because I think yesterday there was a Senate hearing in the US where Sam Altman, I think someone from IBM, was witnessing to the Senate about like conversations around AI ethics, right? And which is part of what you mentioned. Like, I mean, the rise of AI has sparked concerns about a potential robots takeover. Like, is that really going to happen? But let us dive into the concept of AI ethics, right? Which is core why we are having this conversation. And why is it crucial for ensuring that the responsible why is it crucial to ensure the responsible development of this technology, right? And is there a way we can strike a balance between innovation and ethical consideration? Because I remember one of the senators saying, I mean, when people innovate or try to build new product, they say, hey, we don't want government to come in, don't regulate us. Let us grow. Let us grow and do amazing things. When you understand this technology, then you can come in and regulate. But it's different in the case of AIs. The companies are the ones coming forward and say, regulate us now. you
Yeah.
know, so what do you think? How can you strike that balance between innovation and ethical considerations?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of things in this question. I'm gonna try and address them sort of one by one. First, I want to say, the fear of the robot takeover. I think how people usually visualize it is exactly the sort of transformer way that robots just escape all bounds of human control and start running the cities. And that is definitely not happening. Robots and algorithms are very much tools that are being employed by corporations and the government, and by now it's partially also individuals, but they they sit where we humans put them. They're not gonna start
Mm,
wandering anywhere else. The only thing that a robot takeover in the sense that robots are taking over a lot of the tasks because humans make them take over those tasks. That's happening, but that's not something that
mm,
robots are initiating. That's something that humans and corporations and government are initiating. Um, so I think in terms of the AI ethics conversation, because of that, you usually, or I like to split it into sort of two categories. One that is sort of philosophical, a bit sci-fi concern about robots gaining consciousness and taking over the world and building colonies on Mars. And in all honesty, that right now belongs more to science fiction books than the sort of real world. And the topics that I work with, and generally that we're speaking about when we talk to Uber about these big corporations, is the sort of being concerned about the current impact that technologies which are already employed are having, and how to develop and deploy those securely. Um, and I think so. I touched a little bit when you introduced the sort of narrative of these CEOs of big companies giving statements that you should just let us do our innovation and stop trying to regulate us, and you don't understand what's happening in this technology in the first place. And I think that's very silly because they're trying to spin a narrative around the technologies being so complex that no one except for themselves possibly could understand them, and therefore we should just trust them and let them do their thing, and they'll eventually do the good for humanity. But that's not true on many different fronts, because there's obviously academic researchers and also non-academic experts who have a very good insight into these technologies who don't work for those corporations. And law generally, isn't isn't sort of written without the input of these experts. So to sort of assume that all of the experts who have any remote idea about what's happening are only sitting in those corporations just simply isn't true. And the one thing that people outside of those corporations don't know about are sort of proprietary aspects of those algorithms, because obviously the corporations like to keep those private. But if we had legislation in place that um, would mandate specific audits of these algorithms, then you would have someone come in who has the right to look at those proprietary parts of the algorithm and who has subject matter expertise. So it's definitely not impossible to regulate them just from the expertise. I think the sort of balance between innovation and ethical consideration really is a false is a false opposition, because innovation has always happened with safety concerns in mind, like medical innovation or even transport innovation, like cars and trains and airplanes. No one went out and said, well, let's just build the best airplane ever, but we don't need parachutes, and we don't need to have any sort of a concern if the airplane explodes mid-air, because that would hinder innovation. No, it's part of innovation to also make sure that you're addressing safety and security concerns. And may that be in transport, may that be in medicine, or may that be in algorithmic decision making. It's not hindering the innovation, it's part of it, and it's been cut out in a sort of unsafe regard.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, Fiona. Uh, I want to bring it down now. Considering we have startup founders, product designers listening to this podcast, let's imagine a business is building an AI product now, for example. At what point should AI ethics be integrated into the development pipeline? Can you share with us the importance of this ethical consideration throughout the entire process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a common sort of misconception is that AI ethics is, a checklist with a bunch of different questions that you go through at the very end of your development, and then, either you get more green hooks or you get more red crosses, and depending on your product is ethical or not. That's absolutely not the case. You do these considerations kind of flow throughout the entire development and deployment. So, when you start planning a sort of project, you consider the safety and the biases that you could develop with this application. And this is often where people are like, oh, AI ethicists just come in and tell us we can't do the algorithms or we can't do the technology that we want to do. And sometimes that's true. I'm not going to deny that. Sometimes that's true. Um, for example, when you're trying to develop an algorithm that doesn't have a sort of scientific foundation, like for example, Microsoft was, making an algorithm to try and predict teen pregnancy in Argentina 6 years in advance, just based on the age and ethnicity, and I think whether you have hot water in your home. If
Wow.
there had been AI ethics review at that point, someone would have said, your input data does not have the information to give you that, prediction of pregnancy, so you should not
Mm,
develop this. Sometimes that happens, but most of the time that is just an initial review to sort of be like, okay, these are the things that we need to look out for, and then you move into the sort of next phases. And so then you will look at the data that you're using to train your algorithm, and look at what sort of features are in your data. Do you have a column on ethnicity or gender or age or income, I don't know, refugee status, religion, those sort of things? They all fall under a protected category that you're usually in many legislations not allowed to use in algorithmic decision making, because they lend themselves to discrimination based on those protected attributes. So then you look at that type of stuff, but you also look at, what does your data set look like in terms of the populations that it has, a balanced amount of data for white men as you do for Black women. And usually that's not the case. Usually the data sets are mostly white entries, and then less so for Black population. And then additionally, often you have a worse data quality for sort of minority people in the data set. So those are the type of things that you look at in the data, and then when you develop your algorithm, you look at different fairness metrics. You look at whether or not you're able to explain a decision that the algorithm does, and then that goes into transparency issues. And when testing that algorithm, you don't just look at how high is the accuracy, but you also make sure you test a variety of sort of edge test cases. So, for example, there was the very famous case of the facial recognition performing really, really well on white people, and performing much worse on Black people. They just hadn't tested that
mm,
thoroughly. or even outside of technology and algorithms. For example, medicine is often tested on on men primarily, and not really on women. So those are obviously tests that you definitely should have, and then that's part of it. Then once you sort of developed your solution, when you deploy it, you look at getting user consent for processing data, and consumer transparency. You've let people know, hey, we're using an algorithm, this is what we're using the algorithm for, this is how your data is being collected, you have the right to not have your data collected. And then in the sort of long term, you look at something called feedback loops. So when you have an algorithm that's trained on data, but then the decisions of the algorithm produce more data that it might be retrained on, then you can have something like a runaway feedback loop. So for example, Amazon a while ago trained a hiring algorithm, where they were basically training it to sort through application CVs and just pick out those that are most like the people that they already have in the company. But the problem is that the people who were already in the company were mostly men. So this algorithm learned to filter out any CV that had the word woman in it, or would sort of infer that it's women. Exactly. And so if they had employed this algorithm, then the algorithm would have made biased decision, which would have produced more biased hiring decisions. So then you would have had even more more men in the company, or the same amount of men in the company. And then if you retrain that algorithm 10 years later, then you're essentially retraining it on outputs that it has created itself, and you would just worsen the gender balance at each step. So yeah, those are a couple of things sort of throughout the deployment or like throughout the entire pipeline that you can look at and you should look at.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really, really interesting. And I mean, when you even think about like generative AIs, there's been a lot of concerns around privacy, privacy violations, scams, copyright infringement. What do you think are the implications that all these concerns hold for the future of AI, and how can we navigate these challenges?
Yeah, I think so. So the generative AI is an interesting one, because right now, as it stands, every single conversation that you're having with OpenAI is then used to train OpenAI again, or to improve it. And they're being a bit vague about how exactly it influences it. I had a lengthy discussion with OpenAI about to what extent my conversation with it would influence its training weights, and it didn't want to tell me. But obviously the problem that arises from this is people in corporations using OpenAI or other chatbots in order to fulfill parts of their work tasks, and then accidentally or unknowingly, let's say, leaking sort of confidential firm data. And those are genuine concerns for the companies, but also if it wasn't confidential data, if it's just your own personal data, it's also a problem. So I think that no matter how cool the technology and how powerful the technology, it should not stand above considerations of privacy and security and legislation, most importantly. And I think right now there's many discussions going on of whether or not it does or does not violate things like GDPR, because in GDPR you are legally, you have the right and the opportunity to withdraw your consent for your data being used, and to ask for your data to stop being processed as part of an algorithm, um, and for your data to be deleted. But if your data has already influenced the structure, and the learning of this algorithm, even if you delete your chat history, it's already flown into that algorithm. So is it even possible to delete it out? So those are all very important questions that need to be answered sooner than later. And in my personal opinion, probably would have been better to answer before things like this get released.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Fiona, as we round up, let's talk about access to AI technology, right? There's been
Yeah.
conversation that AI access to AI technology should be equitable, right? Regardless of income or education level. Can you share with us maybe some strategies or initiatives you think can ensure that AI is accessible to everyone, promoting inclusivity and equal opportunities? Maybe when it even comes to research or even building new innovations around AI.
Yeah. So that I think that's sort of the question, for the years going forward of how who will these technologies empower and who will they harm, and I think, as you said, the access to these technologies will be very fundamental in sort of determining that. I think we have to look at two different categories in terms of these technologies. One is the source code, the source technology, the databases, and the sort of, the raw sort of entrails of these technologies. And I think there it's very important to not make that exclusive to big corporations. So I think we're running a risk right now because, the data sets are so massive, and the training with this big data sets just takes so long, that you're almost unable to do that in academic context just because you do not have the funding to run, hundreds of servers for several weeks, in order to get sort of one training result. And oftentimes you don't know if it's going to work after you train it, so you might have to retrain it, and these sort of things. So in terms of the development of these technologies, it's going to be very crucial to have, sort of a structure in place that allows researchers to operate at a similar level in complexity as big corporations do, because otherwise, the way that these big corporations are trying to spin the narrative now, the technologies will become inaccessible to any expert who doesn't sit within a corporation. And obviously, any expert who does sit within a corporation is sort of bound by that corporation's goals and strategy. So that's one thing that will need to be sorted out. But on the other hand, I think AI tools and technologies as products for, everyone, for you and me, and for everyone who likes to play with them, um, that should be very much equitable, because you know being able to write a CV, being able to write a job application, with the help of these technologies, will make all the difference in terms of, how many applications you can send out, how well you can respond to legal situations without needing to employ an expensive lawyer, and these sort of things. So making those useful tools available to everyone, and to empower everyone, um, I think is very crucial. But that is very different from, making the coding accessible to everyone, because personally I don't believe that it's very beneficial if anyone and everyone at home can, scrape the internet for massive databases and develop algorithms that might expose private data that otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to the internet, and isn't necessarily subject to certain regulations. So I think splitting it into the sort of, building and development versus packaged up AI products is a good start to think about that question.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, Fiona, for sharing that. So there's one question I would like to ask, and yeah, as we round up. So if you have any other thoughts, you can share that with us as well.
Yeah.
There's been AI has had its fair share of blunders, right? I mean, one of the interesting example you gave is Amazon tried to train its hiring AI or algorithm to employ people. For some reason, it was just trying to, bring in or accept, male employees, for example. So,
Yeah.
are there any other stories that you think was very, very captivating for you around these blunders that you can share? Maybe AI gone wrong, and maybe some lessons. I mean, you can learn from these
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the list is so long. There's now very comprehensive sort of open source Excel spreadsheets that researchers have put together of all of the times it's gone wrong. I'm happy to give a couple of examples. I think you can separate it into sort of categories. The first one, which I think colloquially people like to call snake oil, is the sort of people building algorithms for things that frankly you can't build algorithms for, like as I mentioned, the sort of pregnancy predictor, or there has been loads of papers of algorithms trying to predict intelligence or political opinion or sexuality on the basis of pictures of people. And frankly, I think the rule of thumb here is that if you put a group of experts in a room and they cannot, make that decision based on your inputs, then your algorithm won't be able to do it. But B, also frankly, if it's impossible, it's impossible. No algorithm can do magic. So that's the sort of snake oil category. Then the second category is sort of uninclusive design. So where it's maybe not necessarily harmful directly, but you've definitely forgot to think about the category of people. So I think one example is I think it still exists, but there's an Apple health app that is sort of pushed onto all the Apple devices, and the idea is that you can track anything and everything that's got to do with your health, and I think you can track how much you walk and what type of medicine you have to take and things. But when this first got pushed onto the market, it did not have any period tracking functionality or anything relating to women's health. So we're quite essential for half of the population. So you can see there you plain forgot to think about part of the population. But then I think the biggest group and unfortunately the worst group of those AI blunders is the harmful one. And people have developed algorithms and published algorithms that have specifically had a negative impact on mostly minority communities. So you've had sort of algorithms for detecting skin cancer that were trained only on pictures of white skin. So then skin cancer looks very different on black skin, and the algorithms weren't able to detect that, which means that cancer stays undetected in black people more, which will lead to a higher death rate. There was a sort of a public benefits algorithm in Colorado that, for one reason or the other, denied Medicaid to pregnant women. Pregnant women, as it was not needed. There's Google ads. When we Google something, we have like an ad for job offers on the side. It turned out that it was disproportionately offering higher paying jobs to men and less higher paying jobs to women, and I've also had a racial bias as well. So depending on who you were, then Google just decided which type of people you're likely to be able to get. So yeah, there's and then of course the one I think that most people know about is the Compass algorithm that kind of first sparked this in the sort of public eye, which was in 2016 sort of revealed by ProPublica, that an algorithm that was used in the US in order to determine whether or not a prisoner or an inmate is likely to reoffend, so to go out and commit a crime after being released. That algorithm was heavily racially biased because they had racial proxies in the training set. So they did, you have the protective attributes that I mentioned earlier, but you often also have proxies to those attributes that will enable you to reasonably guess what race or gender someone is. So the proxies that they had in this algorithm were things like, your zip code, or how many of your classmates were arrested before you finished high school, or your parents' education, and especially the zip code in the United States before this was trained and employed, you have very sort of racially segregated neighborhoods or historically Black communities. So the algorithm could very easily determine whether or not someone is a Black inmate or a white inmate, and often, assign higher risk scores to Black inmates and Hispanic inmates than their white counterparts. So, those algorithms are employed and have direct negative impacts onto minority communities.
Oh wow, those are very, very interesting, examples. I mean, looking at, these examples you've shared. So Fiona, is there anything you'd like to share with us? Finally, as we round up, maybe you want to talk about a book, maybe an interesting book about AI, anything.
A sort of final word. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, final word, exactly.
I think one thing I want to say in terms of biases is that, generally people like to say, oh, anything and everything is biased, and that's true. And if you design an application for something, you will not be like, it's almost impossible that you can design it for everyone. The problem with these algorithms is that they hit the same communities over and over and over again. So, Black community, women, Black women, especially disabled people. If it's biased towards the same communities over and over and over again, then becomes a systematic issue that just reinforces the problems that we currently have. So that's the one point I want to, as a closing note on bias. And then you mentioned resources. I'd be happy to throw out sort of a couple of names just in case people would like to, hear more about this topic. One podcast, if you don't mind me recommending another podcast on yours, that I always recommend on this topic is the Radical AI podcast. That is run by two beautiful humans, Dylan and Jess, which invite and workers and activists and frequently discuss sort of different topics of AI bias, technological impact on society, but also strategies and how to go about it. So that's a good sort of just source of knowledge. And then maybe for anyone who's looking to get into the field of AI ethics, there's a great community called All Tech is Human, which offer mentorship programs and put on events, and they're sort of trying to bridge the gap between academia and the sort of industry pipeline, and getting young talent and people who are interested in this topic to be part of the solution and get a job and opportunities in the AI ethics field. So those two I'll throw out.
So thank you, Fiona, for sharing that. I think that's an amazing recommendation, and thank you. And I believe people listening will really find that very helpful and insightful. So I want to say a big thank you, Fiona, for joining us today on Curious K podcast. It's really been an amazing conversation. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you everyone for listening. We believe you really enjoyed this conversation. Watch out for the next episode. See you next time, and bye-bye.